Everyone, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. My name is Arthur Marinis. I'm the Managing Director of Base 2 Services. Base 2 Services itself is a managed service business. We focus on deals as a service, particularly with FinTechs and health tech companies. But I will ask Charles from Parakeet to introduce themselves quickly too.
Thanks, Arthur. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you. Look, Parakeet started about 3 years ago, and what we're trying to do effectively is inject early payment discounting into every invoice that gets issued. And the idea around that is to encourage businesses to pay each other earlier by using early payments discounting. So so today, I guess you'll hear from myself and Rob, who's also the CTO and co-founder of Parakeet, just to talk about our journey so far, and we hope you find this useful.
Thank you. So today's webinar is, as the title reads, how a FinTech can maintain agility while addressing non-functional requirements and ensuring compliance. Now, we always have had an issue with non-functional requirements. We believe there's no such thing. If it's something that's required to run your business, if it's something that's legally required or compliance required, or if it's customer required, it's no longer non-functional, even though that badge seems to be there quite a bit. Usually it's around security, usually it's around compliance requirements, usually it's around reporting, usually it's around scalability, which is quite odd because if you run a SaaS, scalability is probably one of the key things that should not be non-functional. It should be functional. So I'm going to start off with agility. So Rob, I guess this is one for you really. Agility, how has it increased your ability to grow your customer base? What is it about agility that really makes it different?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Arthur. Look, agility has been key for us. When we started out, we only had 2 developers that were working part-time, and we were trying to build a payments platform where we had a significant goal in mind for where we wanted to be. But in order to make sure that the business was viable by the time we got there, we had to cut up what we were delivering into smaller targets. And the way that we did that was we tied it to a online marketplace that we're aiming for. And we were trying to make sure that we were building the right components at the right time. And being agile meant that as new challenges came up or as new customer requirements were identified, we were able to take our end goal and make sure that we were still working towards that, but reprioritize things that we had perhaps put further down the line. We've got a really good example of that where a month before our go live date back in 2019, our primary integration partner informed us that the payment gateway that we had previously been working towards to onboard all of our suppliers was taking a lot longer than we had previously anticipated. And we were able to pivot the entire team, carving out exactly what we needed to deliver, setting it up, building it by week in very small, sharp sprints, making sure that everything was ready, and then deploying the various steps as they were available. So rather than building an entire service and then trying to deploy it all into production and then trying to test it, we were able to build the new onboarding service, then we were able to build the new payment integration, and then we were finally able to hook that all up into our PCI compliance overheads. So that's a key example of how agility allowed us to take a situation that could have been fatal for our company.
One of the key things that I've known is a lot of companies see agility as ways to do things in a shortcut. Is that true in terms of agility?
No, one of the things that we actually found that our agility is actually preloaded a lot of the work that we do in making sure that we've got the steps ready and we know what we're going to be testing and how we're going to be testing it before we build it. We actually make sure that we've got the test cases written before, and then we write the requirements and the functional implementation steps along that. We work really heavily with test-driven development, and we find that that's the best way to do our agile development. So we find that by bringing that testing process really into the sprint estimation, the planning sessions, and making sure we have a clear goal in everyone's mind, the developer, the tester, and the product owner, of what we're going to be doing with this function when it goes into production by the end of the week. We found that really helped everyone. And that's core to our agile development philosophy.
Parakeet is PCI compliant, isn't it?
We are, and we're very proud of it. We are PCI level 1 service provider compliant.
Yeah, which is fantastic, right? How long did that actually take you to get there?
In terms of the initial level 3 compliance, we were able to achieve that within 2 months of starting the business. And then we started the road for the PCI level 1 compliance. And from the start to the finish, it was a little under 3 months, really, to get everything in place, including all of the documentation. In terms of PCI compliance, there's 12 requirements that burn down into about 200, almost 300 individual elements. Most of those are around our sort of infrastructure obligations, which obviously Base 2 helped us with significantly, which meant that our team could focus on what they're good at, which is building the software. And we were able to push across all of the infrastructure stuff onto people who could better do that than we did, which meant that we could focus really on delivering the product. Because it is so difficult to get PCI compliant, and because it's an ongoing burden that the business has to wear, you have to make sure that your documentation's update, you have to go through 3-month and 6-monthly audits. It means that companies that are just looking to sort of dabble in the area, but aren't willing to commit to actually become PCI compliant can be sort of pushed back. Once you've gained the hurdle of being PCI compliant, it really does protect you from people who might look to be trying to enter the area, but aren't willing to actually commit to do the work for it.
The other side of the coin is, I know that in other organisations that Base 2's work closer with, it's taken up to 12 months to get that PCI compliance, and in a couple of instances, even longer. In your case, though, what would have happened if it took you a year to get this compliance?
We wouldn't have been able to operate. So if we had not been able to get the initial level 3 compliance, which allows you to basically process credit card transactions, that would have meant that we wouldn't have been able to provide that initial product offering to our online marketplace customers. And that would have meant that we would have had no transactions, no customers for the first 12 to 18 months of the business. And now that we've got the level 1 service provider compliance, we're able to offer an enhanced range of payment services that really tie into what we're trying to deliver with the business. If it had taken us 12 months to do that, not only would it have meant that we wouldn't have been able to get into the market, we wouldn't have been able to start growing the customer base and start really talking genuine production ready integrations with our customers, it would have also had a genuine impact on the morale of the team. PCI compliance is quite an in-depth and quite arduous process. For a small team that we've got, having to have those sorts of meetings or work towards those sorts of goals for 12, 18 months would have had a very serious impact on team morale and our ability to focus on delivering our products.
Yeah, I can imagine. How long did you actually budget to get your PCI compliance? What was the expected timeframe you initially had before kicking that off?
The expected timeframe that we had was 6 months based on our previous experience in getting PCI compliant at a previous company. And that was because we knew that we were working greenfields. So we had initially thought it'll take about 6 months. One of the hardest parts is always just the audit process itself.
Well, so you actually came in 3 months earlier than you planned. That's actually fantastic.
We did.
Yeah. So, and I assume in respect to that, your business was able to operate 3 months earlier. Is that correct?
Correct. So we were able to press ahead with our next sort of generation of growth for the business, and we were able to focus on getting a product out a lot sooner than we were initially anticipating.
Building scale. Now, you did mention scale earlier in the piece when we were talking about agility, but building scale from the start, how did it help reduce the onboarding time for customers?
So we really focused on setting up a system where the back office stuff was all automated away, where we could provide a set of tools for the user to onboard themselves. And in certain circumstances, Charles or I would get a prompt to go and do sort of a manual verification if AML KYC was required. But really, we were trying to get it as automated as possible so that we could scale without dragging ourselves down. I think we got to the point where we were onboarding for the multi-vendor marketplace. We ended up onboarding 3,500 users in just under a month, which was really quite pleasing. Those were buy users, and that was completely hands off for us. We didn't have to interact with that at all. It's handled by a front end where a user would self-register, load in their credit cards. It would basically assign the details and allow them to prioritize things by themselves. And I think we had about 80 to 90 vendors on board within that time frame as well. And it took us maybe 5 minutes for an AML KYC check if they were a sort of a complex vendor, but for most of those, it was a minute or two where we'd need to go check over the details, make sure that the ABN's all matched up, enable payments, and then they're free to go. With our new platform, Charles has really pushed for a self-managed growth cycle. So what we're trying to do is we're offering a platform where vendors can onboard themselves, and then they also onboard all of their own users themselves. So they're able to get any of their customers. They're able to issue invoices out to them. And that's completely hands-off now. So we've set it up so that if we onboard one vendor, that vendor then onboards 30 to 40 of their own customers who can then integrate themselves into the platform, then they can onboard their other vendors or their other customers. And we're really looking to get sort of an explosive growth out of that, all without having to do anything else, ideally.
That is fantastic. I believe you mentioned their KYC and so forth, and ensuring that, legally everything's above board. Is there a point in time where that can be and should be completely automated?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So we're looking at ways that we can integrate either an external service that would do the AML KYC checks for us, or whether there's things there are the ATO and things like that. They provide services these days that we're looking to integrate as soon as we can.
I'll move on to the next one. Parakeet has partnered with Xero, is that correct?
Yeah, we're going through the final accreditation process now to get listed on the marketplace. So yes, we've been going through a trial process for the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Xero to you is about acquisition of new customers.
Yeah, absolutely. The great thing about Xero is, they have over 1 million subscribers, which are predominantly small and medium-sized businesses. And what we've found is, because our mission as a business is really to solve late payments between business-to-business transactions. And how we want to do that is in 2 ways. One is, which I touched on before, is actually getting early payment discounts embedded into every invoice that gets issued between businesses. The idea around that is to encourage people to pay each other early with discounting. And the other side of the pie is actually automating paying bills, because paying a bill is actually really painful, believe it or not. And we all probably know that. And what we've discovered is if we can solve both sides of the equation from an accounts receivables and accounts payables perspective, I think we can really solve the whole late payments issue, which then brings us back to Xero, because Xero as an accounting platform, not only do they have the customers, but they've got the ability for us to integrate both account receivables and accounts payables.
Was Xero itself a strategic path for you, or was it something that came later on?
No, it was something that we've had a goal towards, right? So as Rob mentioned, we did look at multi-vendor place, which is a sort of a step to growth. Post delivering that, the second step for us was always going to be a Xero and another enterprise software such as Esker. So we've always had these 3 steps in mind. Now we've achieved both of those, and Xero is the last one in those 3 milestones we're trying to achieve.
But there is new partners in the pipeline, isn't there?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the way Rob and I see this is we sort of nail each of these partnerships, and then we understand how we can step and repeat that into the same type of partners. So we see this as not just a growth and learning experience, but the ability for us to now scale beyond the 3 key pillars that we're trying to grow.
Getting that Xero integration in place and getting that seal of approval from Xero means that you've now got a formula for repeating that again with almost anyone else. Just getting there.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. So, we've had different learnings from each partners, and each of those learnings are scalable for us now. Once we integrate with Xero, we'll just step and repeat that with the next partnerships that we decide is the best one to go with.
How have you gone about ensuring security within the system?
So there's a series of PCI obligations that relate to security. Obviously, we've got the 12 monthly penetration test that has to be conducted, and there's also an ongoing obligation to conduct an ASV scan against the service. But we also have a security process baked into our actual development. So as part of our code review process, we have a series of checklists that each peer developer has to run through to ensure that the code that we're writing, as we're writing it, before it even gets deployed into the development environment, is secure and takes into consideration any of our obligations or any new changes in functionality. We also have a review process where every fortnight we identify a security topic and we get one of our developers to take a focus on that and identify areas of potential risk within the code base. And we also have a monthly hackathon where we get one of our developers to attack our development or test environment in a novel way and then see how we can recover. Recently, we did that by replicating a ransom attack. So we had one of the developers basically download the content of the dev database and then move it all out and see how quickly we could recover to that, as well as identify the area of attack. So those are all the sort of additional steps that we take to ensure that our system is secure in addition to PCI compliance, because PCI compliance provides you with a lot of the process and documentation and infrastructure security steps that you can follow in order to ensure that you have a secure system. But the actual secure coding obligations within PCI are fairly light and fairly high level. So we take these additional steps to ensure that the software that we're delivering, we have confidence in over and above our PCI obligations.
But what kind of skill sets or roles does Parakeet have to engage with auditors and ensure PCI compliance? I.e., are there dedicated roles or do devs wear the hats of understanding and implementing compliant features?
That's a fantastic question.
It
We
is.
do have a dedicated role. That's my role. Fortunately, I am the one who has to be across all of PCI requirements. But I work as I lead up the dev team. I work very closely with the developers in briefing them on their obligations and ensuring that the requirements that we work on, the tasks and features that we build, are PCI compliant. While we were conducting the audit process as well as the primary contact, and we would pull the developers in for various interviews with the auditor as required. But we wanted to make sure that the developers' overheads as part of the PCI audit were as minimal as possible. The audit process itself can be very stressful, especially when you have to step through elements of the code or step through the database to ensure that the card details aren't being stored in plain text, that sort of thing. And while we had a very good auditor who was very obliging and very congenial, it's quite stressful on the developers. So we're ensuring that they were sort of removed from that step as much as possible. Also, not just because Base 2 is hosting this call, but Base 2 were pivotal to ensuring that we were able to get PCI compliant. We had a dedicated resource who was on almost all of the PCI audit calls with us, talking to the auditor, stepping through the various infrastructure steps, making adjustments as we went through. We effectively tried to have a segmentation of concerns where the developers have an understanding of PCI, they've read the requirements that are relevant to them, and we've got a training document as well as process documents that ensure that on an ongoing basis, what they're working on is PCI compliant. But the developers themselves didn't have to learn all 12 requirements. For instance, they didn't need to worry that much about physical security and that sort of thing.
Were you able to pick and choose your auditor, Rob?
In the space of our audit period, we actually went through 2 different auditors. Both of them were good. They both understood the requirements. We were very happy with the auditor that we ended up with, but we did sort of end up with him because of timing rather than necessarily because of choice. The PCI DSS is supposed to be updated very frequently. I think it's supposed to be updated every year, and it hasn't been updated for 4 years or thereabouts. So it's quite out of date, and cloud systems are very alien to what the PCI requirements word for word say. So we got quite lucky in that we had an auditor who was both familiar with the technology that we were trying to use and also understood how to interpret the requirement in such a way that it was applicable for a cloud service.
Thank you, Rob and Charles, for your time. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Parakeet goes over the next 12 months. We do wish you the best.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate it.